Leonardo da Vinci, Vincent van Gogh. These names are known far and wide for the vast legacy of creativity that each one left behind. These are artists that were able to find a new source of creativity, and they are artists I can only aspire to be like. Pablo Picasso once said, "To draw, you must close your eyes and sing." So I decided to try it. And it actually ended up looking a lot like his painting. What he was actually meaning when he said this, though, was that when we are creating art, we must learn to rely on more than just our hands and our eyes. Embedded deep in each one of these masterpieces is that truth, a new source of creativity. So what lies behind this genius? The brain. We have an unending amount of questions about the brain. What do we really know about how it works? How does it tie into creativity? And does it really look like a bunch of worms in real life? Today we will be first looking at the two different hemispheres, their different characteristics, but how they must work together in order to perform fully functional life. Secondly, why it is that we are seeming to see a neglect of development in the right hemisphere. And finally, how we have seen the detrimental effects of this in history and what we can do to turn it around. The brain is an amazing organ, one of the most complex pieces of our body. It is so complex, in fact, that our brain has trouble fully understanding itself. But we do know some things about the brain. We know that the main place where the thinking happens is called the cerebrum. This is split into two different hemispheres, the left and the right, often known as the masculine and the feminine hemispheres. The masculine hemisphere is very analytical. It enjoys math and science. It's very logical. The feminine hemisphere is more spontaneous, typically the extrovert. If we were to use spaghetti to illustrate the differences between the masculine and the feminine hemisphere, the masculine hemisphere would look something like this. It's very clear and concise, with everything having a place and everything in its place. The feminine hemisphere, being its inverse, would look more like this. It's typically the extrovert, and so it likes multitasking. But it is creative and it is imaginative. And these characteristics are crucial for being fully prepared for the world. Scientists have discovered this by looking at the brain in more depth. In between the two hemispheres is a thick band of nerve fibers known as the corpus callosum. This acts as a sort of transmitting device that communicates back and forth between the two hemispheres, creating a very unified brain that is able to communicate quickly. Scientists have discovered how important this is by studying split brains. Split brains often occur because someone is having seizures multiple times a day, and so they opt to have an operation that will sever the corpus callosum. This does take away the seizures, but it also changes their way of life permanently. Because no longer can they communicate quickly, the brain is very disunified. Even doing simple things, to us simple, very difficult for them. Even something like pushing a button in response to a flashing light. It's very hard for someone who does not have the ability to communicate between both hemispheres. Scientists, by studying this, have come to marvel at the complexity of a fully functioning brain that can communicate with itself. They have also found that it is equally important to develop both hemispheres equally. This leads to a much more bred mind that is ready for the world. Around 1960, a man by the name of Professor E. Paul Torrance created the Torrance test of creativity to measure creative output. This has been taken by millions of people around the world, and what is shocking is the ability of this test to predict the accomplishments of children when they become adults. Those who score very high on the test as children go on to become inventors, college professors, doctors, and diplomats. But what is also shocking is how the scores of America's children have been steadily inching downward, particularly over the past 20 years, but specifically at the age when a child goes to school to learn. According to David Stracker, research shows that when a child is about 5 years old, they're using approximately 80% of their creative potential. But the scary part of the story is that only 7 years later, at the age of 12, this has dropped to 2%. And it typically stays there for the rest of their lives. So what could be causing this huge loss of creativity? Albert Einstein once said, "It is a miracle curiosity survives the formal education." Even 80 years ago, Einstein was able to see a serious problem with our school system. That curiosity is not encouraged, it is discouraged. Thomas Edison was known to have said, I remember I never used to get along well at school. I was always at the foot of my class. It's funny to think of a legend like Thomas Edison ever being at the foot of any class, until we realize that the same is happening today. Classrooms should be the incubator for creativity. Instead, it is much easier for the government to simply standardize everything and not allow for differences of mindset. John Taylor Gatto discusses this in his book, Dumbing Us Down, where he states that no longer is the classroom about creativity. Instead, it is about covering it up with the goal of conformity. Because of this, our children are not being taught to develop their creative hemisphere. Instead, they are being taught to only use the left hemispheres, to only focus on the facts, figures, and numbers. Repetition is used to train children to always accept what they are being told. And they are not rewarded for using their creative hemisphere and questioning the validity of the information they are given. Instead, those that do are reprimanded. But those who simply accept and merely regurgitate it on command when it is time to take a test, those are the children that go on to become our leaders in government, in law, in medicine, and every other occupation with power and prestige. The good grades get the good jobs, right? So what am I saying? I'm saying that the majority of our students with the highest grades aren't truly being prepared for the tests of life, what they will be called on to do. There's nothing wrong with academic knowledge. In fact, it's very useful and helpful in many ways, but when we are only teaching them to memorize and repeat knowledge, then there's really no creativity going on. That is why they will not be prepared, because they are missing half of the questions on the test, half of the most important questions on the test. They're not being taught the inventive side of the brain, the problem-solving side, the on-the-spot thinking side. Wouldn't we want our leaders to be able to think creatively for themselves? Instead, we see that our school systems are slowly but surely becoming cookie-cutter machines, processing opinions. They're trying to force every child through the same standardized process. Where else have we seen this in history? Long time ago, 1939, in Nazi Germany. The Hitler Youth were taught using this exact same process. Listen to what you're told, believe it, and don't try to think otherwise. By using this same repetitive process, Hitler accomplished his goal of programming a robot-like army incapable of independent thinking. According to some historians, what eventually led to their demise was the common soldiers' lack of creativity and inability to think outside of the box. They had been carefully programmed to ignore their creative hemisphere, but when their leader failed, they also failed. We seem to be following their footsteps when it comes to creativity. Now, I'm not saying that we're all becoming Nazis. I'm simply saying that we too are slowly losing the ability to develop both hemispheres and to use both hemispheres. Because of this, we are becoming worse than split-brained, because we are holding ourselves back to half of the use of half of our brains. We are holding ourselves back to the use of half of our potential. Now, it's not the educational setting that is to blame, it is the educational system. Whether a child is homeschooled, private schooled, or public schooled, they need to be given the opportunity to develop both hemispheres, to memorize the facts, and to think creatively. In the most literal sense, though, America is losing its train of thought. So what can we do to change it? Seems like it's gone pretty far. Margaret Mead once said, "Never underestimate the ability of a few caring people to change the world. For indeed, it's all who ever do." It is up to us to make the effort to go to the mental gym each day and develop our creative hemisphere. The fun part is that you get to pick the colors of creativity that you want to put on your palette. For some, this means singing. Others like to play a musical instrument of some kind. Even listening to different kinds of music has shown itself significantly to develop the creative hemisphere. Other things like going to new places or reading new books. Some of my favorite ways are creativity through fashion, and I also like art in the form of painting and drawing. Another very effective way is writing. Really anything that takes you away from habit or conformity. Even something as simple as eating with your non-dominant hand. It's actually fun, you should try it sometime. But more importantly than it just being fun, with just a little effort on each of our parts, We are standing up against the tide of conformity that is trying to pull us down. We've been created by an amazing God who has put in us a fully formed thought process. And by using it to its fullest potential, we are bringing glory to our Maker and also avoiding the mistakes that we've seen in history. We're bringing color and creativity back into our nation, and we are regaining America's train of thought. Thank you.